In the command line section of this course, we saw how to clone a project from GitHub using the command line. So in this lecture, we're going to perform the same thing, but this time we're going to clone an Android project from GitHub using Android Studio. Now, in order to do this, we're going to fork a public repository on GitHub and then clone it. So the reason that we're forking this project into our own account is that we want to use this same project in a future video for the demonstration of the pull process, and that needs write permission for file modifications, which we won't have if we arbitrarily choose a public repository. We would have to get the owner of that public repository to give us write access. However, if we fork the public repository ourselves, then we've got full access to it. So let's go to GitHub first, and we're going to find a project that we can use. So I'm going to go to GitHub. And let's do a search. I'm going to do a search for Android Nougat, given that that's the time of recording this, the current version of Android, to see if we can find an Android Nougat project. All right, so we've got 54 results. This one looks interesting. Android Nougat's Easter egg for older Android versions. Let's just open that one up. It doesn't really matter which one you choose, but this is probably a good one. And as I mentioned, we're going to fork this so it goes into our own account. So I'm going to click on the fork option. And you've seen that before. You can see now that I've done that, the fork count has moved up to 12. And you can see now that in my repository, we've got this Nico collector. And incidentally, if you want to actually go to this repository, so when you're watching this video, you can come to this location, timberchalker.nico collector, and fork this project. So that'll fork my copy of the project. That could be an interesting way to actually see how forking works. So you're sort of forking a project that has already been forked, if that makes sense. But in any event, you can see I've now got this project forked in my account, and I can click on the little cat to go back to the home page. We can see that we've got this Nico collector there. And we've got the little icon indicating that it's a fork. All right, so let's now start up Android Studio, and we're going to clone this project. So start up Android Studio. And what I'm going to do is close down the last project because we're not going to be using that for now. So if you've got a project open, I'm going to ignore that update for now. We don't need to do any updates. And I'm going to click on this little disable, this checkbox to disable the tips coming up every time. I'm going to go to File, Close Project. Click on Yes to that if you got that message. Okay, so the option we're going to use now is Check Out Project from Version Control. So I'm going to click on that option, and I'm going to choose GitHub. And we should have an option here. And you can see we've got an option for all the repositories that are in the account. And the latest one that we just forked was this one, this Nico collector. So I'm going to select that. We also need to choose the directory where we want this project to be saved in. And by default, it's probably quite a bad default because it's going to the subfolder of the calculator project. So I'm going to delete the that part of the directory. So it's going to go to the desktop, and it should create a subfolder called Nico Collector. Now you would obviously change that to wherever you want to save that on your file, on your computer. I'm going to click on Clone. And when this pops up, would you like to open it? Absolutely. We're going to click on Yes to that. We want to see the files. Now, ignore this IDE internal error. That does happen from time to time with Android Studio. We can close that one down. But the other message that was there relating to there being a problem with the file, that is something that we need to fix, and that does come up automatically, usually when we open a new project from a public repository that we've cloned. And we'll click on that and see if we can get access to those messages again. And here it's got error loading project, cannot load two modules, details. I'm going to click on the details. When we do that, this pops up on the screen here. And what that's saying is that if you look carefully, you can see easteregg.iml and app.iml. Now they're actually Android Studio project files. And the reason that we've got an error there is because they aren't included in a repository. And that's normal behavior. We don't want them to be included normally. So what we're going to do is actually click on Remove Selected for both. And when we do that, that not only fixes the error, and I'll just close down this event log now, by clicking it, but it also enables Android Studio to recreate them. And I can click on Build and Rebuild Project just to confirm that that's going to work. So if you see an error like that, that's how you go about fixing it. You click on yes to remove the files, then Android Studio should helpfully recreate them as it's actually done here. All right, we can click on project to have a look. We can expand it out. I can select project to view there. We can see there's a Nico collector.iml, which is a project file. But in this .idea folder, we've got the various files that IntelliJ needs to track the project. So the point is that we've now got everything we need for this project, and we've managed to successfully clone it. And now that was a public project, so I'm going to close that one down. File, close project, and we will be using that in a future video. But there's nothing preventing us from getting another copy of our calculator project. So we could come back here again, check out project from version control, select GitHub, and we could select our calculator project, calculator app, and let's call it something else this time because we just want to change things up. We'll call it calculator, maybe application. It's in a different folder anyway, so it should work. We can click on clone, and that's actually taking a copy. It's cloning the remote repository back onto our local computer. Click on yes to open the Studio project. And notice how we've again got this error here about not loading the two modules. Same thing there, I can click on that. I can click on remove selected, and that will actually fix the errors. Now finally, I want to just choose one other file. Close the project for that one. Because not all files will import smoothly. So we'll do another search for, say, Android Studio again, or Android Nougat, I should say. We have a look at another project, and let's fork that one. So this is the Android Blur Launcher. That looks to be a bigger project. I'm not sure whether it is, but it seems to be. But let's see what happens if we try and import that project and whether it works or not. Check out project from version control, GitHub. I'm going to select that project that we just forked, Android Blur Launcher. Click on clone. Now, depending obviously on the size of the project, some will take a lot longer to download and clone than others. And also, depending on the files and the format and the structure of the project, you may have problems in actually getting a project to actually work correctly. And that's because you'd require a knowledge of Android Studio and also Android development in general to be able to figure things out. So it does depend on your level of expertise as to whether you know how to go about fixing some of these errors. So I just want to point out anyway that depending on the project, you may get different error messages. And probably the easiest thing to do is just clone the project, that Nico collector that I've shown you, or one of my other projects, which you saw the calculator project imported correctly. But some other projects may run into difficulties because it really depends on how they've configured and set up their projects and added those projects to GitHub. All right, so I'll pause the video until this is finished and we'll come back. Okay, so we've come back now. I'm going to click on yes. Now this is giving us asking for additional information. And this is what will happen depending on the projects. They may or may not be set up. So I'm going to leave everything as the default here and just see what happens. Click on OK. And obviously going through and setting all these types of advanced projects up if there are problems is outside of the scope of a Git course. What I'm really trying to do here is just show you how to go about cloning repositories onto your local computer. You still need to have some knowledge of Android Studio or whatever software package you're using. In this case, we've actually got an error. And clearly we need to actually change something. We need to either define an environment variable to fix that problem or define the location with the SDK dir in the local properties file. That's obviously outside of the scope of what we're doing here, so I'm just going to click OK to that and actually cancel. But the point here is that some projects you will need a knowledge of Android development or of Android Studio in general to be able to get them successfully imported into Android Studio. But as we saw, it does depend on the project because we successfully got the Nico collector project cloned as well as our own project. All right, so lastly now I'm just going to go back here. I'm going to actually remove that from my list of repositories because obviously it's not going to work. So I'm going to click on settings in GitHub and I'm just going to take a copy of the repository name from here. I'll scroll down to the bottom and click on delete this repository. I'm going to paste that in and click on delete this repository. Okay, so let's end the video here. In the next video, we're going to look at pulling data from GitHub. So in other words, pulling down changes made from GitHub inside Android Studio. So I'll see you in the next video.